guys for having me on. Thank you guys for having me on here. And I heard somebody say a while ago that he's old school, right? He's dressed with a suit and tie on, which is kind of funny because my sponsor, Brandon Putzer, is actually speaking at a facility that I run like 200 yards from here. He spoke with you guys last week. And the joke was, well, I said, man, I got to leave the meeting so I can go down and get prepared for the Zoom talk. And I think I'm just going to wear my shirt and tie and jacket down here to introduce you and then run home. So I'm actually sitting here in a pair of shorts with a suit, jacket, and tie and shirt. And I always kind of get a kick out of that on Zoom because it's, like the alcoholic loves to live two different lives. It's like I could be in two different places at one time. So that's a cool experience. You mentioned my name. I go by the name of Roscoe. It's a nickname that I picked up back when I was a freshman in high school. My last name's Roscoe, as you've mentioned, and that seemed to be difficult for one of my teachers to get a grasp on how to say it. And of course, this back in the days of the Dukes of Hazzard, and Roscoe was a popular name, and so she just decided one day that she was going to call me Roscoe. And the name stuck, and that's been my name ever since, to the point where a lot of people don't know I have another name. They think I'm just Roscoe, like Cher or something, just Roscoe. And of course that served me well over the years as I started on my journey to addiction. And I could always be somebody else, and that was important to me. My sobriety date is July the 5th of 2014. As I mentioned before, I am sponsored. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor men in the program. And I also run a recovery center called the Bridges of Hope in Louisville, Georgia. And we house about 72 people of various degrees of alcoholism and drug addiction. And we're 12-step based. We are exclusive to 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a blessing. And this is actually where I landed on July the 5th of 2014 was what we call the first chair at the Bridges of Hope. And it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew what it was, like everybody knows what it is. My daddy was an alcoholic, an extremely violent man, a low bottom drunk who was reaching his bottom. So when I got to the rooms, I wasn't ignorant to alcoholism as it related to somebody else, but I had little knowledge of the disease as it manifested in myself. Right, I identify as an alcoholic, though a lot of my experiences were with dry goods and other substances because of the fear I had around alcoholism growing up with an alcoholic father. And so I was troubled when I get there, and I've got these other really big problems, and I'm trying to think, how can I reconcile? Right, first I was asked to speak is how can I reconcile my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I fell in love with the Alcoholics Anonymous program, the spiritual side of it, the step work. I enjoy working with people. I mean, it's just a glorious way to live, and I wanted to respect it, but I felt like there was an element of dishonesty in it. And I was sitting down one day praying on that, and I realized that the big book on page 44, our qualifying page, states that if when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely, or you have little control over the amount you take in once you start, then you're probably alcoholic. Well, I was able to relate that because I could drink a beer right now, and before this night's up, every beer that I have is going to be gone. Every beer that you have is going to be gone, and every beer that they have is going to be gone. And when the alcohol's gone and everybody else is settled in for the night, I tend to go to seek out other resources for my continuance of this thing, and most of them end you in jail, and they definitely end you in some really bad places. So, I found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous after probably a 32 or 33 year career with substances. It started when I was 10 years old in a horse pasture. You could roll up the kind of alcohol I was using at the time and smoke it, and I enjoyed the feeling of that. I stayed away from alcohol because of my father's history with alcohol until I was, a freshman in high school. But I dabbled around with these other things, right? And I didn't realize until I got into the rooms and you guys were teaching me how to do this work that the reason that I did that, right? I've never sat down and really thought about what in the world was it in me as a child that possessed me to need to change the way that I feel. And it was because I was always uncomfortable being who I was. There was some shame because of the things that happened in my household with my father. You know, he did what drunks do, man. He might get drunk and go out in the yard, start raising all kind of hell, butt naked with pistols and carrying on. And so I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. And I thought that people judged me according to that. And I was, you know, so I felt kind of outside of what was considered normal. Now, him being a low bottom drunk and being in places that low bottom alcoholism exists, I grew up in an environment that was similar to my situation, right? We all had, all our parents had substance problems, there were a lot of single parents, there was a lot of violence, and that was kind of the element that I grew up in. So I thought that was normal. And later in life, when I did my first inventory, I realized that I had used those things as an excuse for bad behavior. I could always justify the things that I did because of somebody else's alcoholism, completely ignoring the things that were going on in my own life based on my own alcoholism. And, you know, I started out like everybody else. We smoking this and drinking some beer and going out to the river. I live in a rural community, and so there's not much to do for the kids, but we go, you know, cop somebody into buying us a 6-pack of beer, and we go down to the river and burn a tire, which probably not a good thing to do looking back now, but and sing songs and sit out there all night and drink and just, you know, socialize. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And that rocks on through my teen years. I start running into trouble in school. I'm not, you know, I'm not a very good student, and so I'm truing a lot, and my mind is on other things, work and money, and you know, I've got a taste for girls by this time, and this thing's developing in me, but it's not manifesting as a continuous usage of any particular thing. It's showing up in a need to be present in all sorts of different circles, right? I can't be good where I'm at. There was always a need to be somewhere else, or to do something else, or to have something else. And you know, what I realize now through our literature is that I was irritable, restless, and discontented, and that was a theme throughout my life. Now, I blamed it on some other things, right? I never understood spiritual malady until I got to the rooms. I've never even heard that term used. And so I'm ignorant to this whole process. Though I've been around alcoholism my entire life, I'm ignorant to the disease of alcoholism. And as it's happening to me, I'm unable to catch it, right? There's no indicator. I'm getting locked up. I start getting DUIs. I end up in a work camp at 19 years old for 14 months because I had got my 4th DUI in like a month. And the judge finally said, you know what, man, you seem to be incorrigible. We're going to send you somewhere and kind of check this thing up. And that didn't work. And so, you know, my drinking has escalated over this period of time. And I'm still a young man. I'm just out of high school, right? I've already got a prison record for consequences of alcoholism that I'm not even aware I suffer from, right? I think I'm having a string of bad luck. And this continues, right? I meet a girl, and I called myself going to college, and I went down to Statesboro, Georgia Southern, and there was a lot of partying going on, and I fell in with that crowd, and there were all sorts, this was the 80s, so there were all sorts of goods floating around, alcohol and other things. And I partook in all of them because that seems to be where I gravitated to, the people that had the things going on that I wanted to be a part of. And there was minimal consequences. See, flunking out of school, I didn't consider a consequence. I consider that something that happens when you party too much, and at some point, something would happen in my life that would let me see and correct the course that I was on. So I considered myself just a good time fella, right? I like to party, and I like to stay out late, and I like to chase the girls, and I like to drink whiskey, and I like to do all the things that, you know, a 19, 20, 21-year-old likes to do. And then I get to be 24, 25 years old, and the people that I'm running around the streets with are starting to graduate from college and get married and start building a life. And I'm still doing the same thing with a younger generation of people, right? So it's like I'm stuck where I'm at, and people are coming up by me. And so I'm latching on them because they still got the same thing going on that I want to have going on, right? The party. I wanted to keep going. I want to have fun. Well, eventually, of course, what happens is I flunk out of school, and I'm forced to move back to my mother's house. And I meet a girl, and she's raised by a preacher, and so her mother and father are a unit, and the family's a unit, and I don't have any concept of what any of that looks like. And I think she's kind of attracted by that element of me, the bad boy, the kind of free spirit. I didn't have much guidance. My mama had to work to raise me and my two sisters, so I was kind of free to come and go as I chose, and I was into all these things, so I was doing my thing, right? And that was attractive to this girl on some level, on probably a rebellious streak that she had in her. And she hooked her horse to my wagon, and some things happened, and ended up we had to get married. Well, I thought we did have to get married. Back in the days, I did the right thing, and I married her. And of course, now with a child on the way, the idea was that when I have this child, I'll be able to straighten my life out, and get me a good career, maybe go back and finish school, and be a good father, and take care of this child, and take care of this woman, and buy a house, and have all the things that young married couples want to have. And that just wasn't the way that was going to be, right? I had no kind of idea. First off, I didn't know how to be married. I'd come from a dysfunctional family, so that was a thing. And second off, I didn't particularly want to be married. I was still wanting to go out and sow my seed, so to speak, right? I still wanted to stay out all night and party with my friends, and go down to the river drinking liquor, and do all the things that, a 25-year-old person might want to do. I thought everybody would do it. And my wife had graduated from Georgia Southern, and she took a job as a defects caseworker. And I was working in the profession that I adopted as a career, and finally got educated in years later, land surveying. And so we were kind of trying to piece a little something together. I was still drinking pretty heavily. The other stuff I'd kind of let go. But drinking was a pay of life. She drank on occasion and moderately, and I drank how I drank. And I thought that was the correct way to live. So it became clear to me that since I was married, and I had a child, and I had a mortgage, and I had insurance, and I had grown up stuff to do, the amount of money that I needed to accommodate my lifestyle, that if I would start peddling some of the goods I was using, I could probably get mine for nothing. And so I started doing that. And I was doing it out of the mailbox of my home, where my 5-year-old child lived. And my wife was a defects caseworker, and she had gone to work a case on a woman who would visit my mailbox. And when she went to take her children, the girl told my wife that, well, your husband's the one that's supplying this. And needless to say, that was the end of my first marriage. And when I got home from work that day, she said, "You'll never believe what happened." And I said, "You're probably right." She mentioned this girl's name, and my jaw fell. She already had my stuff packed, sitting beside the door. My job was to get my stuff and get out of now her house. And I did that. And like every good drunkard does, I went and lived with my grandmother. My mother had died at this point. And so I go pile up with my grandma. And now I'm all heartbroken and depressed and resentful. I can't believe this woman did this. How dare her do this to me, this great provider of money, and blah, 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 blah. I go through this whole rigmarole with that kind of deal. And now I'm piled up on this 70-year-old woman, and I'm still wanting to conduct my life as I see necessary, right? What I didn't understand is that this thing had progressed to a point that I was where I couldn't not do it, but I still had in my mind wanted to do it. Right? That wasn't consequential enough. So a prison sentence hadn't been enough. The birth of my child hadn't been enough. A divorce hadn't been enough to give me any insight into the problem that was developing, which was my life, right? So I'm going through all these things, and everybody else is to blame for the situation I find myself in. And it rocks on there a couple of years. And I'm tired of being depressed and miserable. So I set one of my sisters to the task of finding me another woman, right? I said, "Why don't you go into your friend group and see if you can't round up somebody and hook me up on a date with them?" I said, "The only stipulation I have is that they have to be fully self-supporting through their own contributions." And so she found me a woman who was kind of independent and had her own house, which was important since I was homeless. and had enough money to pay my truck off, which is important because my money was going to something else. And now I've got this one family, my former family with a child, and I've married this woman who has kids of her own, and I'm in a ideal position for somebody that likes to do the things that I do, because I can lie to this woman about what's going on with this other woman, right? The lack of money, the bank account being sucked dry, I could always put that on my child. Well, she needed some shoes, she needed a dress, she needed this, she needed that. And since the two women didn't get along with each other, I never had to worry about them getting together and being exposed. And that came 13 years later, when my second wife had enough of the things that I had going on, and she decided that enough was enough, and she put me out. See, I married this woman. I had laid claim to. She already had a house that was bought and paid for, and as soon as I moved in, that became my house in my mind, and that's my vehicle, and that's my everything that she had became all of a sudden became mine. And I'd walk around with the attitude that, you know, my house this, my house that, my car this, my car that. But when she had enough of it, she put my stuff out there outside the door, and she pointed to it and she said, that stuff right there in the corner, that's yours. Everything else is mine. I want you and your stuff out of my house. So I had to move out. The only thing I had a possession I had was an Ibanez guitar and a 1993 Toyota Camry car, and that car became my home, right? So by this time I am full-blown engulfed in alcoholism and these other things, and it's I'm working for the man, right? It's everything that I make is going towards this. So whatever little bit of money I've been able to accumulate over this lifetime of work, I was about 43, 44 years old, it was quickly diminishing. Credit cards were getting maxed out, savings was gone, 401ks gone, child's college fund gone, all, you know. So and the idea I have as these things are disappearing in my life is that I'll stop tomorrow, or I'm not going to do this tomorrow, or next time's going to be different. I'm not going to spend this much money anymore. And I went on for like 2 years in this state of mind, convinced that somehow I was going to be able to pull this thing together. And I ended up in a little 8x12 block building behind my sister's house on the 26th day of June of 2014. And I've got a little aluminum dinner tray that you can pull out and eat, you know, TV tray. And on that tray, I've got a quart of Tennessee moonshine that I got from a truck driver. And I've got a good size amount of some other stuff, and then a handful of these pills. And these three things were the things that I've used for all these years to kind of normalize myself, to make me feel like I fit in, to make me, you know, to bring me out of my misery. And I'm doing these things and none of them are working. No matter how much I try, nothing works. It seems like the more I do, the worse I get. And I had acquired through a alleged break-in of my ex-wife's house, a 44 Magnum pistol. And I'm sitting in this chair out in this room. I've got a mattress that has no bed linens on it, no pillowcases. I've got a old pink velour swivel chair. I've got a television that has one channel on it, sitting on a chest of drawers that has no clothes in it, and an extension cord run from my sister's house to one of those power strips that I've got all the stuff plugged into. I've got one lamp, and this little tray that I've got is pristine. Everything on it is dry and clear and cut perfectly and symmetrical, and my phone's wiped off. I mean, it's just immaculate. No dirt, no dust, no anything. And if you look up, I've got dog mess all over the floor. I've got rotten food sitting behind me that I've spilled in the floor drunk. I've got trash bags of rotten trash just laying around. I've got dirty clothes piled up. I've got all this paraphernalia just laying everywhere, scattered around, all around me. And that's my life. That was the perfect metaphor for me. The things that what do I believe in? The thing that I believe in is what I spend the most time with, right? So I'm looking at these little G gods, and I'm thinking, how come this doesn't work? It's worked for all these years, and now all of a sudden it doesn't. And the only thing, I was in that point that the gift that they give us that we're given called desperation. But I realized that desperation wasn't going to be enough, because I still had one thing that I could do, and that's shoot myself in the face. And I had the gun sitting between my knees, and it's, they got a long barrel on it. I'm looking down the barrel of the gun, and I could see the cylinder on it, and bullets are in it. They look as big as my thumb, and I'm cocking it back with my finger and letting off of it with my thumb, trying to build up the courage to go all the way back with the hammer. Because once I go back with the hammer, I'm going to pull the trigger and shoot myself. And so I'm sitting there for some period of time, and I'm cocking that thing and letting off, cocking that thing and letting off, cocking that thing and letting off. And I finally decided that I'm not going to be able to do it. I like to say I think about my daughter, but really what it was vanity. I was scared that if I missed and like hit myself in the cheek, that I'd shoot half of my face off, and I'd have to exist the rest of my life with a half a face. And I didn't think that would be appealing to whoever. And so I put the pistol down and just slumped down in the chair with this defeated thought that, man, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. And I had reached the whole furthest extent of my consciousness when I got that pistol. Once I was unable to shoot myself, I had no options left. There was nothing I could think. I'd tried taking things away. I had tried adding things to it. I'd tried doing this instead of that, drinking on the weekends, the whole 9 yards, and all of it had failed. And so I was at the very end of what I was capable of thinking of when I grabbed that pistol, and then I couldn't do that. So I just slumped back in that chair and shook my head. I didn't call on the Great Spirit. I didn't say God. I didn't have a relationship with God. I wouldn't know who I was speaking to if I'd have said it. All I remember is that I don't know what to do. And that was it. I don't know what to do. I'm going to sit here and continue to do these things until they kill me. And maybe it'll be tonight. So after a little while, one thing added with another thing finally gets me to a point where I can sleep, and I roll over on this mat and I sleep some things off. I hadn't slept in years. I'd go to sleep or pass out and sleep something off. And as soon as it was, it lost its effect, I'd wake back up, and then of course I'd do it again. And so that happens. The next morning I get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm distraught. I've got a good memory of what happened the night before. I'm scared because that it got to that point. And so I start doing the things that I need to do to get back right. And sure enough, I can't get back right? So I'm stuck in this misery hole. And I had a little job that I was trying to keep so I could maintain this lifestyle I was living, as miserable as that was. I mean, how insane is it to fight like hell to live a life like that? But I fought tooth and nail to stay afloat in this life. And I go to this little job that I'm working at. I'm doing my thing. And finally, the liquor and the pills that I was taking kind of outweighed the things that were keeping me up. And I go into the bathroom to do one of those things, and somebody comes in on me. And it turns into a big argument. And he's a SOB and I'm a sorry POS, and all this stuff ensues. And after a little bit of arguing, he looked at me, he said, "Roscoe, I used to look up to you." And him saying that caught me kind of off guard, but it stopped me. And he said, "I don't even know who you are." And I heard that. And I sat there for a minute and I thought about it. And this kid's name was Willis, and God bless him. I said, "Willis, this is the first true word I'd ever spoken." I asked Willis, "Do you think I want to be who I am?" I have no idea why I do the things that I do. I have no idea. I've lost everything that I've worked my entire life for. My daughter won't speak to me. I've got 2 ex-wives. Y'all think I'm a piece of crap. I can't hold down a real job. I live in my car. Do you really think I want to be this? I have no idea why this happened. I have no idea what to do about it. This is just who I am, and I've got to ride this train till it crashes. There's no options for me. And I'd had a sister that got sober 10 months before me, and Willis made a suggestion. He said, why don't you call your sister? Now, any other time in my life, anybody would make a suggestion like that, I would have any number of 1,000 excuses not to do it. She thinks she's better than me. She's in AA. She's self-righteous, blah, 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 whatever the case is. But this time, I said, okay. So I call her, and of course, she doesn't answer the phone. The last time she'd answered the phone cost about $3,000. So I hang the phone up. I say, well, she didn't answer. I'll try her back later. And he said, no, why don't you text her? Now, any other time in my life, somebody would have suggested that I do something like that. I would have come up with any number of 1,000 excuses not to do it. I told you, man, I would take care of this, mind your own business. This ain't got nothing to do with you. Any number of things I could come up with. That time I said, okay. And so I text her, I'm tired. I'm ready to get sober. And she still got that text. As soon as I sent the text, she called and asked me, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I'm done. I'm over it, man. I'm so done with this stuff. You know, I don't know what to do. She said, I know what to do. You just stay put. I'll be there in 3 hours. So I say, okay. Well, now I've got this job to quit, and I don't have the wherewithal to do it. So I send this kid up there to quit my job for me. And I say, get my paycheck. Tell him I'm going to rehab. I'm going to be gone for a little while. Get my paycheck. I got 2 weeks of vacation time coming, and get that money for me. I'm going to need it. He said, okay. So he tears out, and I get to thinking, as soon as he's out of sight, I get to thinking, you know, I owe this man about $120. My friend, my dry goods friend. And if I don't pay, he's going to be somebody that I'll reach out to when I get back. So I think I'm going to go ahead and call him and pay him. And while he's coming, I'm going to get him to bring me another. And so I've gone from done to 8 ball in about 3 minutes. And there was nothing in that train of thought that seemed insane. There was nothing in that train of thought that seemed abnormal. It was as natural to me as taking a breath of air. And if I do that, and he does what he does, and so my sister drives me down to Miami, Florida, which is about 16 hours from where I'm sitting right now, to a detox center that she had picked out and paid for. And we go through detox, and it lasts, I don't know, 7, 8 days, and it's getting time to come out. And I'm sitting in my room, and by this time, I've gone as long as in 25 years I've ever been without putting something in my body. I was never ever able to make it more than 4 days without putting something in, some whiskey, some of these other things, something I bought at the gas station. There was always something that I had to do. 4 days was as long as I could make it. And I'm on like day 7. And I'm sitting in my room this night, and I'm to be released the next morning on the 4th of July. And I'm petrified because I'm like, man, I do not want to drink. I don't want that above anything. But I know that nothing has happened inside of me that's going to prevent me from doing it. And I've got to go all the way from Miami, Florida, way back up into the middle of Georgia. And there's so many truck stops and gas stations and things that we're going to have to stop at. I just don't know if I can do this. She's got a 28-day program picked out for me. I don't think 28 days is long enough. I need longer. These are thoughts that I'm having. I'm not voicing these to anybody. It's just a thought that I'm having. And I sit up all night worrying about this, man. I need long term. I don't think this is enough. I'm scared I'm going to drink. All these things are running through my mind. And the next morning, this counselor comes and gets me. My sister's on the phone, and I walk down there, and she said, Bubba, I found you up. She's trying to talk me into something. She says, you've been at this little game you got going for about 30 years. And I said, yeah, I'm aware of that. And she said, I don't, just me thinking, but I really don't think that 28 days is enough for you. And I said, you don't? And she said, no. So I did some research and I found a 6-month program in Louisville, which was 32 miles from my house. And if you'll commit to 6 months, I'll pay for it. Well, the first thought I had was, man, that's crazy. I was just a few hours ago thinking about needing a long-term facility. And then the second thought, the Roscoe thought was, 6 months, man, you freaking kidding me? You know, my life's going to be a train wreck in 6 months. And it got real quiet. And she said, your life's already a train wreck. And I sat there and thought about what she said and said, okay. So she flies down there and rents the car and hauls me back up here and sets me down in this first trip and Bridges of Hope. And on the walls, of course, you've got the steps and you've got the traditions. And I'm riding this road, you know, and as somebody comes in, I move down a seat, move down a seat, move down a seat. And I have no understanding about what this stuff's talking about. I don't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, the program. I think it's where a bunch of drunks go and sit around. And I ain't really even a drunk, right? I got this other stuff going on. Y'all can't help me, right? And I run into this old man who comes out here and does step work with people. And he's an older gentleman and he's an ex-preacher, has no experience in any of the dry goods whatsoever, but he is a low bottom alcoholic. And we strike up a friendship, right? There was something about that man that attracted me to it. It wasn't the, you know, that I didn't see the things we didn't have in common, because he taught me that stuff's irrelevant. Those are all symptoms of a much bigger problem. You suffer from a spiritual malady. And if we can get your spirit awakened, the desire that you have for all this other stuff will go away. And I was like, man, that sounds cool. How do you do it? And he mentions the word God. I'm like, man, I'm not sure about that. You know, my conception of God was, how in the hell I get into shape? I mean, now if there was a God, he'd surely stop this train wreck years ago. And he says, well, you need to sit down and think back over your experiences, because I'm sure if you thought back over them, you've already had experience with him. And I started thinking over the week before I ended up in that detox, and the night before I ended up in detox, and the things that happened the night before I left detox. And I remember that slumping of the shoulders and the defeated posture that I took, and the words that came out of my mouth, or the thoughts that I had when I said, man, I have no idea what to do. Right? I had conceded that there was nothing I was going to be able to do to fix this problem that I had created. And I knew it. I mean, I knew it to the core of my existence that I cannot beat this. And the next morning, some things start happening. Now, I don't see them as what they are at the time. I'm looking back and I'm seeing this thing, how it's been perfectly laid out for me, right? The path that I am now on was perfectly orchestrated by something that's not me, to the point of reading my thoughts, right? I remember sitting in a meeting and listening to how it works. And I heard it saying, we suddenly realized that God was doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And the first thing that came to mind was finding a 6-month, a long-term recovery center. And so I said, man, that might be my second step experience, right? Because I didn't see it as a coincidence. I didn't see it as circumstance. There was something, I saw it, right? It was truth, and I saw it, and I could not unsee that. So now I'm sitting on the first step experience, the concession. I'm sitting on the second step experience, this power doing something for me that I'm unable to do for myself. And I'm faced with a decision. Okay, you can quit playing God and take the third step, or you can keep going like you've been going and keep getting pretty much what you've been getting. And I'm like, well, what does quit playing God? I don't even know God. I'm not playing God. I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, quit making your own decisions. Start listening to people. Follow some suggestions. Give up what you think is right and wrong, and what you think you know about yourself and other people, and just do what I ask you to do. And I said, okay, what do you ask me to do? He said, writing inventory. I'm like, well, I don't, okay, but that seems easy enough. And then it describes what writing inventory is. I'm like, and I don't know if that's that easy or not. Because that divorce wasn't my fault. That divorce was her fault. That second divorce, that wasn't my fault. That was her fault. Losing my job, that wasn't nothing I did. That's my boss's ass, right? He's intolerant. He made a mistake. And sitting down and have to really sit down and look at these things. And then having to share them with another man and let him point these things out to me, the things that I had sometimes intentionally blinded myself to, he was able to point out to me. And after it was all said and done, there was a lot of things on there that I was ashamed of, and I didn't want anybody to know. And I remember one day, you know, it was pretty outside. It was coming up on the fall of the year. And any time in my life that on a day like that, you know, it's real crisp and blue outside and it's cool, I would start having positive thoughts about how I'm going to be able to turn this thing around. I'd always reach back in my mind and touch that dirt. And it would just suck the life out of it. And so about 3 or 4 days after my fifth step, I'm mopping the floor here at the facility, and it's a beautiful morning. It's crisp and it's cool, and I think the Bulldogs are playing and everything's going my way, man. And I reach back there to touch that stuff, and it's not there. And it was so profound to me that I stopped dead what I was doing and thought, man, you know, for the first time in my life, I don't have to define myself by those deeds. I've still got to clean up some things. But that all those things, all those secrets, all that perversion, all the stuff that had been a weight around my neck that I had told somebody else gave me such a relief. But it was a little bit later. It didn't happen in that moment, right? Because I was ashamed of it. It was only when I reached back there to touch it that I realized it wasn't there. And that was the most freeing feeling that I had ever had. And it reminded me of the fifth step promises, you know, that I would feel a nearness to my creator, right? Now, the only thing that I could equate that to, because I still wasn't well acquainted with my creator or God, and I didn't use those terms, was the feeling of good that I had in that moment. And my willingness to share that with somebody else, man, I was so excited. I wanted to run out and tell somebody what had happened to me. Right. So that's a change for me. This thing is beginning to take form, but I've still got some work to do. Right. I've got a list of amends, and which took me about 5 years to make all my direct amends, and some financial ones I'm still paying. I had heard Mark used to say he had a longest relationship he had in his life was with the IRS, and I find myself in kind of that same boat. But I sit down with my daughter to make the first amends, and I picked her because when I'd gone to rehab, she said, I didn't see that, Daddy. Because her mama had wisened up, right? She took her and left the house when her, kicked me out of the house when she was 5 years old. And I had her every other weekend and some holidays. And I had a wife then that was, you know, had a couple kids. So I could put my daughter with her kids and act like nothing was wrong. So I sit down, man, to make this amends. And as it's coming up to it, I start to realize it's going to be a little bit more involved than what I was thinking. I'm thinking it's some sorry stuff, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, baby. I'm trying to do better. Please forgive me. And there was something that I had done about 12 years before that, some medication that she had been taking that she needed. And I found it and I took it. And of course, it was discovered that I took it, and everybody knew who took it, but I would not admit it. And so 12 years later, after all the things that I've done that I thought would affect this child's life, the only question she asked me was, did you take that medication? And I looked at her and I said, yeah, I took it. And she started crying, not out of anger, but out of relief. And what I realized in that moment and the purpose behind the amends process was that for 12 years, that child had been riddled with guilt, accusing her father of doing something that she didn't want to believe he was capable of doing, and that's stealing from her. And we hugged it out, and started work on our new relationship. And I walked away from that thing with a profound alteration of my attitudes, beliefs, and conceptions. And started on this journey. I mean, I dug in. I not went crazy when I started getting involved at the world level and district, and I was the GSR, and I'm in a sister fellowship that deals a little bit more with some of the things that I was in. We big book thumpers, right? I was the secretary of the state of Georgia in that fellowship. I've always had a service position. I like to go in there now and be the cigarette butt guy, or the put out the chairs guy, or the shake hands when you come in the meeting guy. I don't care nothing about being in the politics of it. I don't care nothing about being in all the up there and got to deal with all that and get my face out there. And I just want to be regular old Roscoe, the ex dope fiend drunkard, trying to do his thing. And man, my life has exploded. I'm in the best relationship with a woman that I've ever been in. It's God-centered. You know, something that I tell my guys. I was doing a workshop this morning in 4th Step. We were talking, got into the relationships. And I said, man, you know, something that's dawned on me over years, if you want to be in a good relationship, you know, we've got to set ideals. The big book tells us in the 5th step that we use our safe conduct as ideals, our sane, sound sex ideal for our future sex life, right? So I don't know what that looks like. I know what it don't look like, right? To be sane and sound in that area of my life. And I said, but you know, I got thinking about groups. I was sitting down one day reading the traditions on the wall, and I thought, you know, I've got several groups in my life. I've got a home group, right, which is my AA group, my CA group. I've got another home group, which is my family, and I've got a friend group, and I've got a work group, and I've got a people I don't know group. And if these traditions will hold a group of dysfunctional people like we alcoholics together, it might be a pretty good outline for holding the rest of the groups in my life together. And so I spent a lot of time in the 12 trail trying to gain an understanding of my relationships through how I am to show up in my Alcoholics Anonymous group, and trying to apply those principles in that area of in every area of my life. So I've got the steps for my sanity. I've got the steps for my mental health and my well-being, but I've also got the traditions for my family unit, for my work unit, how I show up as a father, as a brother, as a husband, as an employee, as an employer. And then there's the concepts of service, right? Learning what it is to be service oriented, not just in sponsorship, but in this fellowship completely, right? That there are sacrifices that I need to make on every level of my recovery in order to gain ground spiritually in every level of my recovery. It's easy to sit down and talk about dope and liquor and run around with women. I know all about that kind of stuff, right? And I can do that for an hour a day or an hour a week with the sponsee, but what am I going to do when I go home? You know, am I present in my household? Do I treat my wife with respect? Do I respect my children? Do I allow everybody to have a say in the conversation that we're having? Are all decisions dictatorial, or are they inclusive of everybody? And I learned that here from you guys, from watching you guys that have years and years and years of practicing this and being attracted to what you've got going on and following suggestions. Like when you're told that when you speak to a group of strangers, you wear a suit and a tie. I'm not a suit and a tie kind of guy, right? I mean, I live in the woods. I wear a t-shirt and shorts and a pair of work boots every day. But I show up the way that I am, that is suggested I show up in order to be a demonstration of a program that saved my life. It gave me a life. It didn't just save my life. It allowed me to have a life. And what a great blessing that is. You know, I heard y'all mention the founder of this group just had a kidney transplant. Back in February, I was going to see my daughter, and my chest started bothering me, and my arm went numb, and my jaw started hurting. And of course, I thought I was having a heart attack. And I show up in the emergency room and they do whatever they do, a heart catheterization. And it was discovered that sometime about 10 years ago, I had had a massive heart attack, that my coronary artery was 100% blocked, and that my arteries had grown around the blockage, something they call collateral arteries in my heart, but 2/3 of my heart is dead. And it took 10 years for it to get to the point it was. So I was in heart failure. And I was laying in a hospital bed looking at what I perceived to be the last moments of my life. And I was asked, would you like something for pain? And I said, no, thank you. I'm an alcoholic. And the next day, the doctor comes in and he's describing what a miracle it is that I survived a massive heart attack like that, blah, 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 blah. And I said, you know what, doc, that is a miracle. It's miraculous, but it's not a miracle because you can explain it. There's a name for it. I said, I'm going to tell you what the miracle is. I was offered intravenous Dilaudid and Valium, and I turned them down. That's a miracle. That has no explanation. There's a power in my life that's greater than me, that finds me worthy enough to offer graciousness to the level that keeps those thoughts away from me, regardless of the circumstances I find myself in. I have no control over that part of it. That's God's work. What my job is to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous as it was laid out before me. And sometimes that looks like sitting down across the table from another alcoholic. Sometimes it looks like getting on a Zoom call with a suit and tie on and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with other alcoholics. Thank you guys for letting me be a part of this.